The morning sun barely touched the horizon when the old man pushed open the glass door of Rita's diner. It was 6:30 in the morning, like clockwork. Every single day, the same time, the same shuffling steps across the black and white checkered floor. His name was George Patterson, though nobody at the diner knew that yet. To them, he was just the quiet old guy who always sat by the window. The one with the brown jacket that had seen better days probably 20 years ago. The one who moved slowly, carefully, like each step required planning. George made his way to the corner booth. Not just any booth. The exact same one, third from the entrance, right next to the big window that looked out onto the street. He'd lower himself onto the cracked red vinyl seat with a soft grunt, the kind that old bones make when they've been around too long. Then came the ritual. He'd carefully remove his jacket, fold it precisely, and place it on the seat beside him. Next, he'd pull out a newspaper from his canvas bag. Never today's paper, always yesterday's, the kind you could pick up free from the library. The first week, nobody paid much attention. Diners get all kinds of people. But by the second week, the staff started to notice. This wasn't just some guy stopping by. This was routine. This was purpose. For a man who looked like he had nowhere else to be, he sure was committed to being here. That's when Linda Torres started really watching him. She'd been waiting tables at Rita's for 3 years now, ever since her husband left and she found herself alone with a 6-year-old daughter named Beth. Linda was 31, but some days she felt 60. 2 shifts most days, one at the diner and another cleaning offices at night. Sleep was something she remembered from her old life. She noticed things about George that others missed. The way he'd smell the coffee first before taking a sip, like it was fine wine instead of the regular brew they served for $1.50. The way he'd read every single article in that old newspaper, even the advertisements, like he had all the time in the world. And he did, didn't he? All the time in the world and nobody to share it with. George would order the same thing every morning. 1 cup of coffee. Black, no sugar. That was it. $1.50 plus tax came to $1.63. He'd make that single cup last for 2 whole hours. Sipping slowly, reading slowly, existing slowly. Linda noticed he never ordered food. Not once. Not even a muffin or a piece of toast. The third week, something changed. It was a Tuesday, one of those gray mornings when the sky couldn't decide if it wanted to rain or not. George went through his usual routine, settling into his booth, spreading out his newspaper. When Linda came by with the coffee pot, he did something different. He started counting coins. His hands shook as he laid them out on the table. Quarters, dimes, nickels, pennies. Linda watched as he counted twice, then a third time, his lips moving silently. She could see the worry creasing his already wrinkled forehead. She knew that look. She'd worn it herself plenty of times. The math wasn't working out. "I seem to be a bit short today," George said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. There was shame in it. The kind that comes from a lifetime of being self-sufficient and suddenly finding yourself dependent on the kindness of others. "I have $1.33. I thought I had more." He started to stand up, reaching for his jacket. "I'll just come back tomorrow when I—" "Wait," Linda said, her hand gently touching his shoulder. "Sit down, please." George looked up at her, confusion in his tired blue eyes. Linda smiled. "The coffee's on me today. Don't worry about it." "Oh no, I couldn't possibly—" You can and you will," Linda said firmly but kindly. She'd already poured his coffee. "Everyone has days like this. Tomorrow's another day." George sat back down slowly. His eyes were getting misty and he blinked rapidly. "That's very kind of you, miss. Very kind indeed. I'll pay you back tomorrow, I promise." "There's nothing to pay back," Linda said, waving her hand. "Friends help friends, right?" The word friends seemed to hit George differently. His expression softened in a way that made Linda realize this man probably didn't hear that word very often. "Maybe not in a very long time. Thank you," he managed to say. "You're a good person." Linda just smiled and moved on to her other tables. But something had shifted. She'd seen beyond the worn jacket and the shaking hands. She'd seen a person who deserved dignity. The next morning, George was back at 6:30 sharp. This time he had exact change. $1.63 in coins counted out perfectly. But he left those same 30 cents on the table when he finished. His tip for Linda. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was what he could offer. Linda picked up those coins and felt something unexpected. Not pity, not charity, but respect. This man, who clearly struggled to afford a simple cup of coffee, still wanted to give something back. still wanted to maintain his dignity, still wanted to be a person who contributed, not just took. She slipped the coins into her apron pocket, not because she needed them, though 30 cents was 30 cents. She kept them because refusing would have hurt him. And Linda understood pride. She understood what it meant to struggle and still want to stand tall. This became their pattern. Some days George had enough. Some days he came up short by a quarter or 50 cents. Linda never mentioned it. She'd just pour his coffee with a warm smile and say, "Good morning, George. How are you today?" She'd learned his name in week 4, and using it seemed to matter to him. Week 5 brought a change. George started arriving with questions. "How's your daughter doing in school?" he'd ask. Linda had mentioned Beth once, just in passing, but George remembered. He always remembered. They'd talk for a minute or two. Nothing deep. Just the kind of small talk that makes people feel less alone. George would ask about Beth's favorite subjects. Linda would tell him about the spelling test Beth aced or the drawing she brought home. Sometimes George would share tiny fragments of his own life. He lived alone in a small place across town. He never mentioned family. When Linda asked once if he had children, his face had clouded over and he'd simply said, "It's complicated," in a way that made her never ask again. Some doors were meant to stay closed. Other waitresses started to notice. "Why do you keep giving that old guy free coffee?" Rita, the owner, asked one day. "He taking advantage of you?" "He's not taking advantage," Linda said defensively. "He's just someone who needs a little help sometimes. We all do." The regular customers had opinions too. George was there so often, always in that same booth, that he became part of the furniture. Some people smiled at him. Others ignored him. A few whispered to each other, making assumptions. Probably homeless. Probably has nobody. Probably just killing time until there's no more time to kill. But Linda saw something different when she looked at George. She saw the way he held himself with quiet dignity despite everything. The way his clothes, though old, were always clean. The way he'd carefully wipe the table before he left, making sure not to leave a mess. The way he'd say please and thank you like they were the most important words in the language. There was a grace to him, a gentleness, and Linda recognized something else too. Loneliness. The kind that settles into your bones and becomes part of who you are. She knew that feeling. Different circumstances, maybe, but the same hollow echo of coming home to empty rooms and conversations that only happen in your head. So she kept paying for his coffee when he came up short. 30 cents here, 50 cents there. Over the weeks, it added up to maybe $10 or $15. Nothing that would break her already stretched budget. But for George, it seemed to mean everything. It meant he could keep coming back. It meant he had somewhere to be, someone who expected him. It meant he wasn't invisible, and neither of them knew it yet. But these small moments of kindness, these cups of coffee that cost almost nothing, were building something, a connection, a friendship, something that would change both their lives in ways neither could possibly imagine. Because sometimes the smallest gestures plant the biggest seeds, and sometimes a $1.63 cup of coffee is worth more than gold. 3 months had passed since that first morning when George couldn't pay for his coffee. 3 months of 6:30 arrivals, the same worn brown jacket, the same corner booth by the window. But something had changed between him and Linda. They weren't just waitress and customer anymore. They were something else. Something warmer. Linda found herself looking forward to George's arrival each morning. In a job filled with rushed customers who barely looked up from their phones, demanding tourists who complained about everything, and regulars who treated her like part of the furniture, George was different. He saw her. Really saw her. Not just the uniform and the coffee pot, but the person underneath. He'd ask about Beth and actually listen to the answers. When Linda mentioned her daughter's upcoming school play, George wanted to know what role she had. When Linda said Beth was nervous about her lines, George suggested Linda practice with her every night before bed. Simple advice, but it worked. Beth nailed her performance as the narrator in the class production. The other staff at Rita's diner started to notice the friendship too. Some thought it was sweet. Others thought Linda was wasting her time on some old man who probably had nothing to offer. Rita, the owner, was neutral about it, as long as George didn't take up booth space during the busy lunch rush. He never did. He was always gone by 8:30, disappearing into the morning like smoke. But nobody really knew anything about George. Where did he go after leaving the diner? Where did he live? The address he'd mentioned once was across town in an older neighborhood, but that was all. Did he have family, friends, a life beyond this booth and yesterday's newspaper? Linda tried asking once. George, do you have any plans for Thanksgiving? She'd said casually while refilling his coffee. His face had gone carefully blank. Oh, I'll manage something, he'd replied, which wasn't really an answer at all. You're welcome to join me and Beth, Linda offered. It won't be fancy. Just turkey and some sides, but there's always room for one more. George's eyes had gotten that misty look again. That's kind of you, Linda, very kind. But I have some things I need to take care of that day. Linda didn't push. Everyone had their secrets, their closed doors, their parts of the past they didn't want to open. She respected that, but she worried about him. This man who seemed so alone in the world. Then came the Tuesday that changed everything. The Tuesday George didn't show up. 6:30 came and went. No George. Linda found herself glancing at the door between orders, expecting to see that familiar shuffle, that brown jacket, those tired but kind eyes. Nothing. 7 o'clock. Still nothing. By 7:30, Linda was genuinely worried. He's probably just sick, Rita said when she noticed Linda staring at the empty booth. Old people get sick. It happens. But it didn't feel right. George was a creature of habit. Routine was his religion. Something was wrong. The day dragged on. Linda's shift ended at 2, and she went home to pick up Beth from school, but her mind was elsewhere. That night she barely slept. She kept thinking about George sitting alone somewhere, maybe sick, maybe worse. And nobody would know. Nobody would check on him. Because despite 3 months of morning coffee and friendly conversation, Linda didn't even have his phone number. Didn't know his last name. Didn't know how to reach him. Wednesday morning, Linda arrived for her shift at 6, half an hour early. She kept watching the door. 6:15, 6:20, 6:25. Her heart was pounding in a way that surprised her. Why did she care so much about this old man? 6:30 arrived. The door opened. George walked in and Linda felt relief flood through her like warm water. But the relief was short-lived. Something was wrong. George looked terrible. His face was gray, almost ashen. He moved even slower than usual, like each step hurt. And his cough. That deep, rattling cough that made people at nearby tables turn and stare. He made it to his booth and practically collapsed onto the seat. His hands were shaking worse than ever as he tried to remove his jacket. Linda was there in seconds. George, are you okay? You look awful. I'm fine, he said automatically, but his voice was weak. Just a bit under the weather. A bit? George, you need to see a doctor. Already did, he said, and something in his tone made Linda stop. Yesterday. That's why I missed our coffee date. Our coffee date. The way he said it, like it mattered, like it was important. What did the doctor say? Linda asked quietly, sliding into the booth across from him. She'd never sat with a customer before. Never had time. Never wanted to. But this was different. George looked out the window for a long moment. Outside, the city was waking up. People rushing to work, cars honking, life moving forward like it always did. Uncaring, unstoppable. They ran some tests a few weeks ago, George said finally. Got the results yesterday. Linda's heart sank. She knew what was coming. You don't live 31 years without learning to recognize that tone, that careful, measured way of speaking that people use when they're about to say something that can't be unsaid. It's not good news, George continued. His voice was steady, but his hands weren't. Cancer, advanced. They're saying I've got maybe 6 months. Maybe less. The words hung in the air between them like a weight. Linda felt tears prick her eyes and she blinked them back furiously. This wasn't about her. This was about George. I'm so sorry, she whispered. George smiled then, a real smile despite everything. Don't be sorry, Linda. I've had a good life. A long life. 78 years. That's more than many people get. But still, the funny thing is, George interrupted gently, these last few months have been some of the best I've had in years. Coming here every morning, having someone to talk to, feeling like I matter to someone, even if it's just knowing that you'll smile when I walk through that door. Linda's tears escaped then, running down her cheeks. She wiped them away quickly, but George had seen them. I've been alone for a long time, George said. My wife died 15 years ago. My children and I, well, we had a falling out. Haven't spoken in over a decade. It's complicated. Family usually is. I pushed them away after my wife passed. I was angry at the world, at God, at everything. By the time I realized what I'd done, too much time had passed. Too much hurt. Some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt. He paused, taking a shaky breath. That cough again, deep and painful. So I've been alone, he continued. And loneliness is a funny thing. It doesn't kill you quickly. It does it slowly, one day at a time, until you start to wonder if anyone would even notice if you just disappeared. I would notice, Linda said firmly. I did notice. Yesterday when you didn't come, I was worried sick. George's expression softened. You were? Of course I was. You're my friend, George. There was that word again. Friend. It seemed to mean everything to him. They sat in silence for a moment. Other customers were starting to come in, and Linda knew she should get back to work. But she couldn't move. Not yet. George, she said carefully, what are you going to do? About treatment? About everything? He shrugged, a tired gesture. There's not much to do. Treatment would buy me a few extra months maybe, but the quality of life would be terrible. I'd rather have 6 good months than 8 miserable ones. I've made my peace with it. Where will you go? Who's going to take care of you? I'll manage, George said, using that phrase again. The one that meant he'd be alone. Linda made a decision right then. She didn't fully understand it. Couldn't explain it if someone asked, but she knew it was right. You'll come for dinner, she said. This Sunday. I won't take no for an answer. Beth would love to meet you. I talk about you all the time. George looked startled. You talk about me? Of course I do. You're important to me, George. So you'll come to dinner, and we'll figure out the rest from there. For the first time that morning, George smiled a real smile, a smile that reached his eyes and made him look years younger. I'd like that, he said softly. I'd like that very much. Linda stood up, squeezing his shoulder gently before heading back to work. As she poured coffee for other customers, took orders, cleaned tables, she kept glancing over at George. He was reading his newspaper, but she noticed something different. He looked less alone somehow, less like a man waiting for the end. And Linda realized something else too. In trying to help George, in offering friendship to someone who needed it, she'd found something for herself. Purpose, connection, a reminder that life wasn't just about surviving, about working double shifts and paying bills and getting through another day. Sometimes life was about those small moments, a cup of coffee, a kind word, a friend who saw you when you felt invisible. Neither of them knew what the next 6 months would bring, but they'd face it together, and somehow that made all the difference. Sunday came faster than Linda expected. She'd spent Saturday cleaning her small apartment, which wasn't much to look at, but it was home. 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, furniture from thrift stores and hand-me-downs. Nothing fancy, but everything was clean and loved. Beth had helped her cook, excited about meeting the man her mother talked about so often. Is he really 78? Beth asked while peeling potatoes. She was 6, gap-toothed and full of questions about everything. He is, Linda said, checking the chicken in the oven. So we need to be respectful and kind, okay? I'm always kind, Beth said, sounding offended. Linda smiled. I know you are, sweetheart. George arrived at exactly 6 o'clock carrying a small bouquet of flowers that looked like he'd picked them up from the grocery store. He'd dressed up, wearing a button-down shirt under his brown jacket instead of his usual worn sweater. His hand still shook as he handed Linda the flowers. For you, he said, and for the young lady of the house. Beth peeked out from behind her mother, shy at first. But George knelt down, slower than he probably should have given his condition, and smiled at her. You must be Beth, he said. Your mother tells me you're the smartest girl in your class. Beth giggled. She says that because she's my mom. She has to say nice things. Well, I'm not your mom, George said. And I bet it's true anyway. Just like that, the ice was broken. By the time they sat down to eat, Beth was chattering away about school, her friends, the stray cat that lived behind their building. George listened to every word like it was the most fascinating thing he'd ever heard. During dinner, Linda watched George carefully. He ate slowly, small bites, and she noticed he left most of the chicken untouched. The cancer was already affecting his appetite. But he complimented the food, asked for seconds on the mashed potatoes, and told stories that made Beth laugh until she snorted. He told them about growing up during harder times, about his first job at 14, about the time he accidentally dyed all his white shirts pink in the laundry, He was funny and warm, and Linda could see glimpses of the man he must have been before life wore him down. After dinner, Beth showed George her room, proudly displaying her drawings and her collection of rocks she'd found. George examined each one seriously, asking where she'd found it and what made it special. "This one's my favorite," Beth said, holding up a smooth gray stone. "I found it at the park. It's shaped like a heart if you look at it right." George held it up to the light, turning it this way and that. "You know what? You're absolutely right. That's a heart if I ever saw one." Later, after Beth had gone to bed, George and Linda sat in the small living room drinking tea. The apartment was quiet except for the sounds of the city outside. Car horns in the distance, someone's music playing, life continuing all around them. "Thank you for tonight," George said. "I can't remember the last time I had a family dinner. It felt good. Felt normal." "You're welcome here any time," Linda said. "I mean that." George was quiet for a moment, staring into his tea. "Linda, I need to tell you something. About who I am, about my past." Linda sat up straighter, sensing this was important. "I wasn't always like this," George began, the old man nursing a $1.50 coffee, counting coins, living alone. "I used to be someone. I had a business. A successful one. Made more money than I knew what to do with." Linda's eyebrows rose, but she didn't interrupt. "I started with nothing," George continued. "Built a manufacturing company from the ground up. Worked 80-hour weeks for years. By the time I was 50, I had 3 factories, 200 employees, and more money than my parents had seen in their entire lives combined." He paused, taking a sip of tea with shaking hands. "But success has a price. I was always working, always traveling. My wife Helen begged me to slow down, spend time with the kids. I always said next year or after this big deal or once we're more stable. There was always a reason to keep pushing." Linda could hear the regret in his voice. "Heavy as stones. My kids grew up without me," George said. "Oh, they had everything money could buy. Best schools, best clothes, fancy vacations. Everything except a father who was actually there. My son Michael and my daughter Patricia, they learned to live without me. And when they got older, they learned to resent me." He set his tea down, his hands trembling worse now. Linda wasn't sure if it was the illness or the emotion. Then Helen got sick. Breast cancer. Suddenly all those deals and meetings didn't matter anymore. I sold the business, retired, devoted myself to taking care of her. We had 5 good years after that, 5 years where I finally understood what mattered, but it was too late to fix things with Michael and Patricia. "Why?" Linda asked softly. "Because by then they only saw me as a bank account," George said bitterly. "They'd visit Helen, but they'd barely speak to me. And when she died, they made it clear what they wanted. Their inheritance. Nothing more." He wiped his eyes roughly. "We had a terrible fight at the funeral. Things were said that can't be unsaid. I told them they'd get their money when I was dead and not before. They said fine, they'd wait. That was 11 years ago. Haven't heard from either of them since." Linda felt her heart breaking for this man who'd worked so hard to build something, only to lose what mattered most. "After Helen died, I didn't know what to do with myself," George continued. "This big empty house, all this money, and nobody to share it with. Nobody who cared if I lived or died except for what I'd leave behind. So I started living small, moved to a modest apartment. Started going to the diner every morning because it gave me a reason to get up, a place to be." "And the counting coins?" Linda asked. "You do have money, don't you?" George smiled sadly. "Oh, I have plenty. More than I'll ever need, especially now. But I wanted to know what it felt like. To be ordinary. To be treated like a regular person instead of someone people wanted things from. And then you happened. Me? You paid for my coffee that day," George said. 30 cents. You didn't know I could buy the entire diner if I wanted to. You just saw someone who needed help and you helped. No questions. No expectations. Just kindness." Linda didn't know what to say. "Do you know how rare that is?" George asked. "How rare it is to find someone who's genuinely good. Who helps because it's the right thing to do, not because they want something in return." "I just did what anyone would do," Linda said. "No," George said firmly. "Most people wouldn't. Most people would have let me leave that day. Would have forgotten about me by the next customer, but you didn't. You saw me. Really saw me. And these past few months coming to that diner talking to you, it's reminded me what it feels like to be human again. Not just a bank account or a disappointing father or a dying old man. Just George. Just a person. Linda reached over and squeezed his hand. You are just George, and you're a good person. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Outside, the city hummed with life. People were living their lives, dealing with their own problems, chasing their own dreams. The world was so big and complicated, full of millions of stories happening all at once. Linda, George said finally, I need to ask you something. A favor. Anything. When I'm gone, I want to make sure you and Beth are taken care of. I want to set up a trust fund for Beth's education. I want to help you with expenses. You work too hard. You deserve better. Linda pulled her hand back. George, no. I can't take your money. That's not why I'm your friend. I know that, George said. That's exactly why I want to do this. Because you'd never ask. Because you're struggling and you still gave me 30 cents when I needed it. Because you invited me into your home and treated me like family. But your children will get what's legally theirs, George said. But I get to choose what happens with the rest. And I choose you. I choose Beth. I choose to make sure that the one person who showed me genuine kindness gets something more than memories. Linda felt tears streaming down her face. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it, George said. Say you'll let an old man do one good thing before he goes. Say you'll accept a gift given freely with no strings attached. Linda nodded, unable to speak. The weight of George's words, his story, his generosity, it was too much to process all at once. George stood up slowly, wincing a bit. I should go. It's getting late and you have work in the morning. Linda walked him to the door. Before he left, George turned back to her. Thank you, Linda. For tonight. For everything. You've given me something precious in my final months. You've given me hope that there's still goodness in this world. After he left, Linda sat on her couch for a long time, thinking about everything George had told her, about success and regret, about money and what really matters, about how the richest man she'd ever met had been, pretending to be poor just to feel human, again. And she thought about how a 30-cent cup of coffee had somehow changed both their lives in ways neither of them could have. Predicted life was strange that way. Sometimes the smallest moments created the biggest ripples. Sometimes helping someone wasn't about what they could give back. Sometimes it was just about seeing another person and saying, I see you, and you matter. And in that moment, Linda understood that George's gift wasn't really about money. It was about being seen, about mattering, about knowing that your life had touched someone else's in a meaningful way. She just hoped he had enough time left to truly feel that impact. 2 weeks after that Sunday dinner, everything changed in a way Linda never saw coming. It started on a Wednesday morning, the kind of gray October day where the cold seeps into your bones and won't let go. George didn't show up for his coffee. Linda tried not to panic. He'd missed that one day before when he got his diagnosis. Maybe he had another doctor's appointment. Maybe he was just having a rough morning. The cancer was getting worse, she could see it. He was thinner now, moved slower, coughed more often. But when Thursday came and went with no George, Linda's worry turned into something bigger, something darker. She didn't have his phone number. Didn't have his address, not really. Just knew it was somewhere across town in the old neighborhood near Fletcher Street. Friday morning, Linda made a decision. She called in sick to her evening shift at the cleaning company. She was going to find George, even if she had to knock on every door in that neighborhood. Beth stayed with Mrs. Chen from upstairs, and Linda took 2 buses to get across town. Fletcher Street was older, quieter than her part of the city. Trees lined the sidewalks, their leaves turning brown and gold. The houses here had history, character. This wasn't where she'd pictured George living. She started asking people on the street. Do you know an elderly man named George? Late 70s, usually wears a brown jacket. Most people shook their heads or ignored her completely. One woman thought she knew who Linda meant but couldn't remember which building. Linda was about to give up when she saw an older man walking a small dog. She approached him, described George again. This time recognition flashed across the man's face. Oh, you mean George Patterson, the man said. Lives in the Hamilton building, apartment 4B. Haven't seen him in a few days, though. Is he all right? I hope so, Linda said. Thank you. The Hamilton building was beautiful in a faded way. Old brick, high ceilings, the kind of place that had been fancy once. Linda found apartment 4B and knocked. Nothing. She knocked again, louder this time. George? It's Linda, from the diner. Are you there? She heard something. A thump, then silence. Her heart racing, Linda tried the door handle. Locked. She knocked harder. George, if you don't answer, I'm calling an ambulance. This time she heard a weak voice. Doors open. Lock's broken. Linda pushed the door open and stepped inside. The apartment was nicer than she expected, but sparse. Good furniture, mostly empty shelves, everything neat and organized. And there on the couch was George. He looked terrible. His face was gray, his breathing shallow. He'd been trying to reach for something on the coffee table when she knocked. George, oh my God, Linda rushed to his side. How long have you been like this? Since Tuesday, he whispered. Tried to get up, too weak. Phone's in the bedroom. Linda grabbed her cell phone and called 911. While she waited for the ambulance, she held George's hand. It was cold and clammy. Stupid, George muttered. So stupid. Thought I could handle it alone. You're not alone, Linda said firmly. Not anymore. I'm here, the ambulance came. The paramedics were professional and quick. Linda rode with George to the hospital, holding his hand the whole way. In the emergency room, she waited while doctors examined him. Dehydration, pneumonia. The cancer spreading faster than expected. A doctor came out to talk to her. He was young, tired-looking, like he'd been working double shifts too. Are you family? He asked. I'm his friend, Linda said. He doesn't have any family nearby. The doctor hesitated. We need to reach his next of kin. Does he have children? He does, but they're not in contact. We still need to notify them, the doctor said. Do you know their names? Linda remembered. Michael and Patricia, George's son and daughter, the ones who'd walked away 11 years ago, the ones waiting for him to die so they could get their inheritance. I can find out, Linda said quietly. Later, when George was stable and moved to a room, Linda sat beside his bed. He was sleeping, hooked up to machines that beeped and hummed. He looked so small, so fragile. Nothing like the proud man who came to the diner every morning. A nurse came in to check his vitals. She was older, kind-faced, and she looked at Linda with sympathy. You're a good friend, the nurse said, staying with him like this. He'd do the same for me, Linda said, though she wasn't sure if that was true. George had never had the chance to prove it. That evening, a lawyer showed up. His name was Robert Chen, and he had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. George had called him earlier that week before he got too sick. Chen had instructions, papers, things that needed to be done. Mr. Patterson asked me to give you this, Chen said, handing Linda an envelope. He wanted you to have it regardless of what happens. Linda's hand shook as she opened it. Inside was a letter in George's careful handwriting and a business card for Chen's law firm. The letter explained everything. George had arranged for Linda's daughter Beth to have a full college fund. He'd set up a trust that would pay for any education she wanted, from kindergarten through graduate school. He'd also arranged to pay off Linda's debts and give her enough money to quit her second job if she wanted to. But there was more. George had bought the building where Rita's diner was located. He was transferring partial ownership to Linda. She'd be co-owner of the diner, guaranteed income, guaranteed stability, a future. I don't understand, Linda said to Chen. Why would he do all this? Chen smiled sadly. Because you're the only person who treated him like a human being instead of a bank account. Because you gave him 30 cents when he needed it and never asked for anything in return. Mr. Patterson is a smart man. He knows what's real and what's fake. What you gave him was real. But his children will receive what's legally theirs, Chen said. Mr. Patterson made sure of that. They'll inherit the bulk of his estate. But what he's giving you comes from a separate trust he set up years ago. It's completely legal and ironclad. They can't contest it. Linda felt overwhelmed. The numbers Chen was talking about, the college fund, the diner ownership, it was more money than she'd see in 10 lifetimes of waiting tables and cleaning offices. I need to think about this, she said. Of course, Chen said, but Mr. Patterson wanted you to know. He wanted you to have security. He said you'd argue that you'd say you don't deserve it. He asked me to tell you that's exactly why you do deserve it. That night, Linda stayed at the hospital. She dozed in the uncomfortable chair next to George's bed. Around 3 a.m, he woke up. Linda? His voice was weak but clear. I'm here, she said, moving closer. You found me. Of course I found you. What were you thinking, not calling anyone? George smiled weakly. Didn't want to be a burden. You're not a burden, you stubborn old man. You're my friend. They were quiet for a moment. Machines beeped. Somewhere down the hall, someone coughed. The hospital never slept, never stopped moving. Did Chen come? George asked. He did. George, I can't accept all that. It's too much. It's not enough, George said. Nothing could be enough for what you've given me. I just gave you coffee. No, George said firmly, his voice stronger now. You gave me dignity. You gave me friendship. You gave me a reason to wake up every morning. You let me into your home, into your life. You let me meet Beth. You made me feel human again. Linda felt tears sliding down her cheeks. I've been thinking a lot about my life, George continued, about all the mistakes I made, all the things I got wrong. I can't fix things with Michael and Patricia. That ship sailed a long time ago, but I can do this. I can make sure one good person, one genuinely kind person doesn't have to struggle anymore. Let me do this, Linda. Let me leave this world knowing I did one thing right. You've done lots of things right, Linda protested. Not nearly enough, George said. But this helping you, it feels right. It feels like maybe my life mattered after all. Please, Linda, don't take that away from me. How could she argue with that? How could she refuse a dying man's final wish to feel like he'd made a difference? Okay, she whispered. Okay, George. He smiled then, a real smile that made him look younger despite the machines and the hospital gown and the reality of what was coming. Thank you, he said. Thank you for letting me help. The next morning, 2 people showed up at the hospital. A man in his late 40s, expensive suit, designer watch. A woman about the same age, designer clothes, cold eyes. Michael and Patricia Patterson, George's children. The ones who'd been notified that their father was dying. They didn't come to his room right away. Instead, they went straight to the hospital administrator's office. Linda heard them arguing about treatment options, about costs, about estate planning. They talked about George like he was already dead, like he was just a problem to be solved. When they finally came to George's room, Linda was there. George was sleeping, his breathing shallow and labored. The pneumonia was bad and the cancer was spreading faster now. Days, the doctor had said. Maybe a week. Michael and Patricia looked at Linda like she was a pest, an inconvenience. Who are you? Patricia asked coldly. I'm Linda, George's friend. Friend? Michael laughed, but there was no humor in it. Our father doesn't have friends. What do you want, money? Linda stood up, her exhaustion turning into anger. I want your father to know someone cares about him. That's all. Something you two clearly don't. You don't know anything about our family, Patricia snapped. I know he's been alone for 11 years, Linda shot back. I know he comes to a diner every morning just to have someone to talk to. I know he's dying, and until 2 days ago, nobody even knew he was sick. Where were you? They had no answer for that. George stirred then, waking up. His eyes opened and he saw his children standing there. Something painful crossed his face. Not hope exactly, but not quite resignation either. Michael, Patricia, he said quietly. Dad, Michael said, his voice awkward. We came as soon as we heard. The lie hung in the air. They'd been notified 3 days ago. They'd come when they were ready. Linda watched the family reunion, if you could call it that. It was stiff, formal, filled with long silences and careful words. No, I love you. No, I'm sorry. Just polite inquiries about comfort and care and whether he needed anything. It was the saddest thing Linda had ever seen. George lasted 5 more days. 5 days that felt like both an eternity and no time at all. Linda was there for most of it, taking shifts with the nurses, holding his hand, reading him the newspaper just like he used to read it at the diner. Sometimes he was awake and they'd talk. Sometimes he just slept, his breathing getting weaker each day. Michael and Patricia came and went. They'd stay for an hour, maybe 2, then leave for important meetings or phone calls that couldn't wait. They were there, technically, but they weren't really present. Not in the way that mattered. On the 3rd day, Beth came to visit. Linda had hesitated about bringing her, but George had asked specifically to see her. When the little girl walked into that hospital room, something changed in George's face. He lit up in a way he hadn't since he'd gotten sick. Beth, he said softly. Come here, sweetheart. Beth climbed carefully onto the chair next to his bed. She wasn't scared of the machines or the tubes. She just saw her friend George, the man who'd listened to her stories about rocks and school plays. I brought you something, Beth said, pulling out a drawing from her backpack. It was a picture of the diner with stick figures sitting in the booth by the window. One was labeled George, one was Linda. "So you don't forget our place." George's eyes filled with tears. "I could never forget. Never." They talked for a while, Beth chattering about school and the stray cat and how her spelling test went. Normal things, beautiful things, things that reminded George what life was supposed to be about. When Beth left, George looked at Linda with an expression she couldn't quite read. "That's what I missed," he said quietly, "with Michael and Patricia. Those moments. Those simple, perfect moments. I was so busy building an empire that I forgot to build a family." "It's not too late," Linda said, though they both knew it was. "Maybe not completely," George said, "but almost." That evening, something unexpected happened. Patricia came back to the hospital alone. No Michael, no lawyer, no agenda. She just sat in the chair across from George's bed and looked at him for a long time. "Dad," she finally said, "we need to talk." George nodded weakly. "I've been angry at you for so long," Patricia continued. Her voice was shaky now, not cold like before. 11 years of anger. "And I kept telling myself it was justified, that you chose work over us, that you didn't care." "I did care," George said. "I just didn't know how to show it." "I know that now," Patricia said. Tears were running down her face. "Seeing you here, seeing this woman who barely knows you treating you better than your own children did, it made me realize something. We became exactly what we accused you of being. Cold, distant, only caring about money." George reached out his hand. Patricia hesitated, then took it. "I'm sorry," Patricia said. "I'm sorry we wasted 11 years. I'm sorry we didn't come sooner. I'm sorry I was so angry I forgot you were still my father." "I'm sorry too," George whispered. "For everything. For not being there when you needed me. For working too much. For not knowing how to fix things after your mother died." They cried together then, father and daughter, trying to heal 11 years of hurt in whatever time they had left. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. Linda quietly left the room to give them privacy. In the hallway, she found Michael standing there, clearly having heard everything. His face was conflicted, painful to look at. "I don't know if I can do that," he said to Linda. "I don't know if I can forgive him." "Then don't," Linda said simply. "But at least say goodbye, because once he's gone, you can't get that chance back." Michael stood there for a long time, wrestling with something inside himself. Finally, he walked into the room. Linda didn't follow. Some moments were meant to be private. The next 2 days were quieter. George was fading, everyone could see it. The doctor said it was a matter of hours now, not days. His children came and sat with him. They weren't perfect. There were still awkward silences and unspoken hurts, but they were there, and they were trying. On the 5th night, Linda was alone with George. It was late, past midnight. The hospital was quiet except for the usual sounds of machines and distant footsteps. George's breathing had gotten very shallow. The nurses said it wouldn't be long now. "Linda," George whispered, barely audible. "I'm here," she said, taking his hand. "Thank you," he said, "for everything. For seeing me, for being my friend, for giving me these last few months. They were the best months I've had in years." "You gave me something too," Linda said through tears. "You showed me that kindness matters, that small gestures can change everything, that we're all just people trying to do our best." George smiled weakly. "Take care of Beth, make sure she knows she's special. Make sure she knows her mother is the best person I ever met." "I will," Linda promised. "And the diner," George continued. "Keep my booth. Let people sit there who need somewhere to be. People like me, people who are lonely and just need someone to see them." "I promise," Linda said. George's breathing slowed even more. His grip on Linda's hand loosened. "One last thing," he whispered. "Don't remember me as a rich man or a dying man or even an old man drinking coffee. Remember me as George. Just George. Your friend." "Always," Linda said. "You'll always be my friend." George closed his eyes. A few minutes later, his breathing stopped. Just like that, quietly and peacefully, he was gone. Linda sat there for a long time, holding his hand even though he was no longer there to feel it. She cried, not just for George, but for everything, for the life he could have had, for the time he wasted, for the lessons learned too late, for the beauty and tragedy of being human. The funeral was 2 weeks later. It was bigger than Linda expected. Former employees from George's company came to pay respects, business associates, a few distant relatives. Michael and Patricia were there, standing together, looking lost. Linda was listed in the program as beloved friend. When she saw that, she cried all over again. After the service, Patricia approached her. "Thank you," she said simply, "for being there when we weren't, for giving him something we couldn't." "He loved you both," Linda said. "He talked about you. He regretted everything that happened." "We regret it too," Patricia said. "We wasted so much time." Michael joined them. He looked tired, older somehow. "The lawyer said Dad left you part of the diner, that he set up a fund for your daughter." "He did," Linda confirmed, waiting for the anger or resentment. But Michael just nodded. "Good, he should have. You earned it more than we did. We got money. You gave him something money can't buy." After everyone left, Linda went to Rita's diner. It was her diner now too, at least partially. She walked to the corner booth, the one by the window. George's booth. A small plaque had been installed on the wall next to it. "Reserved for kindness," it read. "In memory of George Patterson, who taught us that true wealth is measured in the lives we touch, not the money we make." Linda sat down in that booth. She ordered a cup of coffee, black, no sugar. $1.50 plus tax. She thought about George, about their morning conversations, about how a 30-cent act of kindness had changed both their lives forever. The next morning, Linda opened the diner early. She'd quit her night cleaning job. Chen, the lawyer, had assured her the money George left was real and secure. She could focus on one job now. She could be home for Beth at night. She could actually live instead of just surviving. At 6:30, an elderly woman shuffled in. She looked uncertain, like she wasn't sure if she belonged. She sat at the counter and carefully counted out coins from her purse. Linda watched, and something in her chest tightened. She recognized that look, that careful counting, that shame of not having enough. Linda walked over with the coffee pot. "Good morning," she said with a warm smile. "What can I get you?" "Just coffee," the woman said quietly. "Black, but I think I'm a bit short. I only have $1.20. Linda poured the coffee without hesitation. "This one's on me. Friends help friends, right?" The woman's eyes got misty. "That's very kind of you. Someone once told me that kindness is the most important thing we can give each other," Linda said. "So please sit as long as you'd like. You're always welcome here." As Linda walked back to help other customers, she glanced at George's booth. For just a moment, she could almost see him there, reading his newspaper, sipping his coffee, smiling that gentle smile. Just George. Her friend, the booth would never be empty again. Not really. Because George's legacy wasn't the money or the business or the buildings. It was this. It was the understanding that everyone deserves to be seen, to be valued, to be treated with dignity and kindness. It was knowing that sometimes a cup of coffee and a kind word can save someone's life. It was remembering that we're all just people, trying to get through each day, hoping someone will notice we exist. And in that small diner on the corner of 5th and Main, George's memory lived on. Not in plaques or monuments or grand gestures, but in every free cup of coffee given to someone who came up short, in every warm smile offered to someone who looked lonely, in every moment someone chose kindness over indifference. Linda looked around her diner, at the morning regulars starting to trickle in, at the elderly woman sipping her free coffee at the counter, at Beth's drawing of the diner taped to the wall behind the register. This was George's real gift. Not the money, though that helped. Not the security, though that mattered. His real gift was teaching her that the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest ripples. That seeing people, really seeing them, is one of the most powerful things we can do. And every morning at 6:30, when Linda placed a fresh cup of coffee at that corner booth by the window, she whispered the same thing. "Thank you, George, for everything." Because some friendships, no matter how brief, change us forever. And some people, no matter how quietly they live, leave the world better than they found it. George Patterson had done that. The old man whose coffee was paid for by a waitress had taught everyone who knew him the most important lesson of all. That kindness is never wasted. That dignity matters, that we all deserve to be seen. And that sometimes the richest gift you can give someone is simply treating them like they matter. Because they do. Everyone does, even an old man counting coins for a cup of coffee.